All right, so coming up in this episode,
The commonest and the weirdest questions we get asked as teachers of English.
and yes, and we'll also get into the explosive and growing controversy between English linguists and their own Prime Minister in Canada, Mark Carney. Oh my God. We got to hear this. All right, so this is English Musings with Athar and Gordon. Thank you for being here. And we are going to get right into this. I'm Athar from Athar's English. Many of you know me from those platforms on High Local and elsewhere, where I help people by applying the right mindset to build their fluency, speak more clearly, and enjoy the language in all aspects of your lives.
And I'm Gordon from Love English, helping people to communicate more clearly, more fluently, more confidently, and more influentially.
That's right. Now, welcome to our first episode of English Musings, the podcast where language, culture, and curiosity come together.
And we're two teachers, one American, one British, explore the stories behind the words we hear and use every day.
And you can figure out which is which. I'm Athar, speaking to you in Virginia, obviously, always ready to dive into the ideas shaping how we communicate.
And I'm Gordon, joining from Scotland, constantly primed to discuss the language, its use, and its origins.
So sit back, grab a cup of joe or whatever you got warm, and settle in and let's muse about English. All right. You know, I think one of the first things we want to do here is to get an understanding of who we are and what we have been doing and why we're doing it. But why don't we start off with you, Gordon? Tell us and introduce, for those people in the audience who don't know you, who you are and what you do.
Well, I had originally planned to remain an international man of mystery through this segment, but you've persuaded me. So my standard intro on High Local, Tandem, Clubhouse, those sorts of platforms is, my name's Gordon, also known as Mr. Love, because that's my actual name. And I'm a native speaker of English, and I help people to speak English better. That's my basic drive. But to that end, I wrote a pronouncing dictionary of English, aimed specifically at learners of English as a foreign language or as a second language. And it became a bestseller in 12 markets around the world. And ever since then, I've been buoyed up with enthusiasm and excitement.
Oh, that's great. And so that's really, I think, a good start for people to get an exposure to who you are. And as for myself, I'm similarly, also engaged in helping people all over the world as you are with their language skills on some of the platforms that you and I have shared sometimes the stage with. And very much enjoyed that. But one of the things that I think is really important as people begin to understand and use the language for various purposes in life is to see how is it that they can continue doing it for the rest of their lives, enjoying it and getting the right mindset. So I kind of help them with that as well. But yeah, that's, I think, a big part of what we do as teachers, right? Just trying to do that. But what was the trajectory that brought you here? What is it that got you to this point before you were doing the teaching and the involvement in all these different platforms like High Local and Clubhouse and Tandem?
I've had a long wandering path to here. I started off life as an engineer and became a software developer, and then a management consultant. And I ended up as a senior development manager at what became a major international bank, which then collapsed dramatically during the 2008 financial crash. They were just getting ready to be the world's biggest bank when the entire financial industry imploded. And it turned out they had bought assets which were slightly bubbled. And that did for them.
That was a crisis that went beyond
That was
just
a while ago.
Europe. That was also in the U.S. It was
Oh
pretty
yeah,
global.
it it kicked off in the US with the subprime crisis, and it went global. And I was in the globe when it happened, so it affected me. And after that, I became a teacher. I was teaching kids physical exercise. I was looking for something interesting to do, something purposive. And I saw that my kids and loads of other kids were spending all their time playing video games and watching DVDs rather than getting out there and moving about the way that kids used to back in the day. And so I started sword fighting classes.
With
Classical
kids?
swordsmanship,
Sounds
modern
kind of
fencing.
dangerous.
Yeah, that's kind of the fun. First thing I did was I would get the kids to hold an actual pirate cutlass. Well, a replica, but it was, real and metal and big. And then I teach them to stab each other,
Safely.
as you do. That's what kids ought to be doing.
While their parents are
And I was
watching.
doing that for years.
Yeah. While their parents are watching.
Oh yeah,
This is how
that's
you
a whole
stab. This
lot
is
of
how you
story.
stab Bobby.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
The very first course that I ran, it was a summer course at a community centre in a deprived part of town. And all the kids had to fill in a form saying what they had done in whatever centre activity they'd been taking part in. No one thought to put onto the form, what are the kids doing? It was just, what did you learn? What was fun? What was not fun? And the comments forms from the kids went in, I learned how to stab people. What was fun? Stabbing my brother. What was not fun? When my brother stabbed me. That's the quote from the first form that I looked at. And it was great.
So
And so it was popular and I kept doing it.
and that goes from teaching that to teaching English. What was the transition and what brought you there?
So I was doing this, and then I had a series of minor heart attacks. And COVID happened while I should have been doing cardiac rehab. And so after the heart attacks, after the heart op, without cardiac rehab, I was recovering quite slowly. And we'd been in lockdown. So I'd got out the habit. And we needed new protocols for kids for sharing equipment. And I was doing some training as a trauma doula. And we decided as a group we wanted to have some extra meetings, and it was all mainly happening online. And one of the group said, let's go to Clubhouse. Let's have the meeting on Clubhouse. And I said, great, what's Clubhouse?
What so this is
I
like
downloaded
2020, 2021?
So for me, this was kind of this time 3 years ago, towards the tail end of 2022.
22.
And so I downloaded Clubhouse, and it turned out no one else in the group that wanted to use Clubhouse for this meeting turned up in the end. And I was wandering the halls, wondering what was what. And it turned out the way I saw Clubhouse, or the way I experienced Clubhouse, I don't know if it's the same for you, but there are native speakers who are all off in one corner, talking to each other, trying to network and pyramid scheme their way to riches. And then over in the other corner, there are lots of people trying to use it to speak to native speakers so that they can improve their spoken English. But all the native speakers are way over there.
I'm going to jump in here because now I think we can, get through a portion of your background, which is a shared experience with me. And as you're getting into this, I remember getting into Clubhouse. Now, I was there starting in around mid 21, actually a little bit earlier. But when I really started to pick up was after I retired from my government job. I was in government for 35 years, almost 36, and I retired from, of all places. You can look this up anywhere. I mean, DHS. I was working there as an international affairs advisor, and when I retired in late 21, I thought, okay, I'll step up my activities in ways that I can help people, because I'm also a personal trainer, help people. Like you're into fitness, you're into martial arts and things. Like we all have these multiple interests. And I had that interest as well in physical fitness and in personal training and teaching fitness classes. So I went and started spending a little bit of time doing other things, including getting on Clubhouse. And what I found was a lot of people, there were rooms where there's just all these random things going on and people screaming at each other and talking about politics and really going at it. And some were pretty insightful and deep discussions too. But there were these areas in these rooms where it was all about English and learning English. And what I found is a lot of those rooms were non-native speakers. That's not a bad thing, but just people who that was not their original language and who didn't speak it very well, who were moderating, and I put that in quotes, discussions to help people improve their English. And they were saying things that were incorrect. They were saying things that were misguided, and there wasn't a lot of teaching or learning going on. So like
well-intentioned,
yeah,
but misguided.
Yeah. And I thought, this can be better. Like you need to have, so I started to find a few others who are actually native speaking teachers, or some teachers who are not native speaking who are also very good. I don't know if you know Ellie from Clubhouse. There's a few others who are actually quite good. And so I connected with them and I started getting to their rooms, and there was another one, Patricia Curdy, who I believe was Portuguese or Brazilian and speaks Portuguese and was in Portugal, and she had her rooms. So I started going into other people's rooms to help people with their English. And then I thought, I could do this. I could start doing this on my own. After I started doing that, then it started to really resonate and take off. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the connection. I enjoyed the teaching. I enjoyed the interaction. I enjoyed learning about other people and what their challenges were in improving. And to kind of wrap up my little background in English, I thought, if I'm going to explain this stuff in a language that I spoke pretty much my whole life, but it wasn't just because I was a native speaker that I wanted to do this. I've always loved the language. I loved using it effectively and expanding my ability to speak and use it in all those different situations in life, that I thought I need to get trained on it. And so I got certified as a TEFL teacher to teach English as a foreign language. And then people started then I started to really teach lessons individually. And to wrap this all up here, those platforms, you can't really have quote unquote real classrooms. It's because people are coming and going all the time. And it's not like you can have an established curriculum for a period of time because you don't know who's going to show up. So, it was a mixed set of experiences. Some good, some not so good, but it was a learning experience for me, but generally good. So
I found pretty much the same thing. I was there, saw this mismatch between the need for good improvement in English and the fact that most people who wanted and quite often needed an improvement in their spoken English were all being matched with each other. So it's kind of the blind leading the blind. Somehow the thinking was, well, if I don't speak English and you don't speak English, if we speak not English together, magic will happen.
Which
And
never happened.
certainly, I mean, there is one specific type of magic which does work, which is people can gain the confidence to speak by having these opportunities. And often people are quite scared to go into spaces with native speakers. So having that confidence built up gradually is a genuine improvement. But generally, the technical proficiency wasn't improving.
You bring up a lot of...
I started... Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so like you, I thought, oh, I'll try running one of these rooms. It's called something like Native Speaker Gives One-to-One Lessons. And I titled the room, started it up, and people came in and thought, this is fun. So I did it again and again. And it turned out, over the next few months, I only got asked about 13 questions. This is, by the time the months had ended, I was doing it several times a week for a few hours at a time, plus hanging about in other rooms with like-minded people like yourself, which is when I first met you, but more importantly, Johnny USA, who's a phenomenal networker on these platforms. And then Clubhouse.
Yeah,
changed.
I'll just say that, I think, one of the things I learned were learning about the specific challenges that students actually had, learners actually had. And most of these people were adult learners that we got to know, right? There was a smattering of a few here and there of people who were in their teens that popped into the Clubhouse, but the vast majority of people, almost entirely, were people in their 20s to 40s and then sometimes creeping up into their 50s. But generally adults who were either studying, looking to study outside of the United States or outside of their country into some Western-speaking or native-speaking, English native-speaking country, or maybe in Europe somewhere as well, where the English was not the primary language, but they spoke it. And so they wanted to study, they wanted to engage, and wanted to socialize. And in that interaction, in all those interactions that I had in those rooms, I found out, and you hit the nail on the head. Oh, we'll come back to that later, right? But you really were right, spot on with this idea that it was about confidence, that they wanted to overcome fear. They wanted to overcome this fear of being judged, the fear of failure, and yes, they had the other specific things like I wanted to speak more clearly. Some would say, and this is a whole nother discussion we can have, they would say, I want to sound like you. I want to sound like an American. Or I'd say, I want to sound like a British person. And I had the benefit one time of bringing in one of our Canadian friends who is a trained and practicing professional accent coach. And he said, and this is something I repeat all the time, his name will come to me later, but he said, there are two professions in which you need to change your accent. One is an actor, if you're training for a certain part, and the other is a spy. Everybody else has no requirement to do that, okay? Because there's variations and variety of English that it's all about being able to communicate effectively is the key. And whether it is in the process of speaking or listening to others, you've got to expose yourself to a wide range of people and how they speak, but also understand that there are a lot of variations, and we need to be able to appreciate that. I learned that.
Yeah. There are 42 accents identified for the USA, 56 for the UK, which I think is an undercount. There are 7 identified for Canada. I've identified I reckon 7 in Australia, and I reckon there must be at least 3 in New Zealand, which brings us to 120. And there are still other parts of the English-speaking world to tally up. South Africa, the Caribbean, all sorts of places. So there are lots and lots of variety. One of the interesting things about English is that there are massive points of commonality between all of these native speaker accents. Because English, to use a bit of technical terminology, is a stress-timed language. In Spanish, it's a syllable-timed language. Almost every syllable takes the same amount of time. But English isn't like that. The word deepened, or the phrase deep end, or the word depend, all have exactly the same pronunciation, but a very different rhythm, a very different word stress pattern. And so what we tend to preserve from one accent to the other is the word stress pattern. And the pronunciations vary. I mean, forget about it. Forget about it. I can't really do it. Well,
Yeah, forget about it. You know what I'm talking about.
yeah. That's
Hey,
what we're
look,
talking about.
listen. Hey, once in a while we're gonna do this. Here's the thing. Here's the thing. Let me just tell you something. All right. So there's all kinds of accents in the United States of America. But if you're speaking like me, it's normal. It's normal. That's okay. But look, here's the deal. You gotta understand that sometimes, once in a while, you're gonna talk different. You're gonna hear people talk differently. And it's just a hoot. Sometimes I just get a real kick out of this, and I just enjoy it so much. But here's the thing that I realized, and I learned this from other people who do, impressions and accents. The purpose is not that you're necessarily trying to replicate the speech patterns of an entire people. No, not at all. Look, the thing that you're doing is simply trying to say, there is probably an individual who speaks like this. And if there probably is, then you're probably just fine. And that is, by the way, one of the lessons I learned from my good friend, Mark Byron. I remember his name. Mark Byron in Canada, a good friend of mine outside Toronto. And he said that when I teach others accents, it is not about the idea that you're trying to accurately portray a certain way of speaking amongst an entire people. Because I know if I speak in this way, there'll be many of your fellow Brits who will say, that sounds nothing like us. They will say that, and they will be correct. But I would say that it is possible that somebody's probably speaking in this way. And the fact that I can change means that others can change how they speak as well.
Absolutely. One of my favorite things to do nowadays, now that I specialize in accent coaching phonetics, what some people call accent reduction, and I really disagree with as a term. I think of as adding additional sounds to your palate rather than trying to remove your accent or reduce your accent. And one of the things I love to do is to teach the go-to phrase, a bottle of water, in as many accents as I can teach someone in 10 minutes.
Oh, I want to hear that.
So a bottle of water, international neutral, or what I call international received pronunciation. A bottle of water, which would be standard Southern British, or what I call standard Southeastern England English. Or estuarial English, which is working class from the same area, a bottle of water. And then we go across to America, and what we do is we soften the T's down, but we keep the original set of vowels. We don't use the London vowel of ta at the end. We have a bottle of water. So, o-e, o-e. And then, of course, there's this accent, which you were saying is, you can't get it perfectly right, but kind of represents people. And people in New York say, no, this sounds like Boston. And the Boston people say, no, that sounds more like New York. But a kind of working class where every vowel is ah. a bottle of water.
Hey, you got a bottle
And
of water for me? Hey, I'm thirsty.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
I had a friend who went into a corner shop, a local store in somewhere in Washington, D.C. And he said, in an accent very like mine, I'd like to buy a bottle of water, please. And the woman behind the counter said, what? A bottle of water, please. What? He said, and he suddenly realized, water, he said. And she said, oh, water! And she handed him the bottle and he paid for it and out he went.
Yeah, yeah. All right, well.
And you've got Australian, which is the same rhythm. All of these have the same rhythm. Same rhythm around the world. Until you go to Glasgow, where it's a bottle of water.
Bottle of water.
And because it's a completely different rhythm, this is my theory, the reason that everyone else in the English-speaking world says, I can understand everyone, apart from Scottish people, is because this Glasgow accent has a completely different rhythm.
I've heard that as well. You know, and I think before we go on to our next segment, and I think we're going to come back to some of these things that we touched on here today, and we'll get into some of those things. But I hope that this little introduction about who we are and what we do and our experiences so far have given you a little bit of insight about what to expect in the coming weeks and months for us. But let's take a little short break and go into a segment here. And I don't have the graphics here to kind of throw at you and do fancy stuff yet. Hopefully that's coming. But this segment is something that I call a brief word. Oh yeah, something else you want to say?
Do we have a theme tune?
Yeah, well, I'm working on it.
Maybe we've got a theme tune.
I am working on a theme.
Word.
I am working on a really good, catchy theme, and we'll definitely incorporate that. But I wanted to get this first episode out, at least that we can get something started. But the point is, so we'll have this segment, and this upcoming segment is called a brief word, which is kind of a play on words, right? Because when we say a brief word, it's kind of an idiomatic reference to a short conversation, right? But it's also...
I think you have hit the nail on the head there, Athar.
Yeah?
Please, what are your brief words?
Well, I've got a few words on a couple of words that I want to kind of investigate a little bit and give you a little bit insight into. And it's something I was looking into recently related to teaching and learning. And so the word is pedagogy or pedagogy, depending on where you are and how you pronounce it. But pedagogy, that's Pedagogy. And it refers to anything that is related to teaching and learning, right? Think about the atmosphere of learning at a university or a school. It is and then you think of those things that are related to that as an adjective. We'd say it's pedagogical or pedagogical, right? Pedagogical references refer to those things that are related to the teaching process or learning process. And it even has the root PED, right? Think of ped as, I don't want to use terrible terms, but you have things like pedophile, or you have pedestrian. It refers to a person, but it also can refer to a child. And then I thought, well, are there any other words that are related to this? And I found another one, and it was not a commonly known word. I think as I introduced it to other people recently, including yourself, it was like, oh, that's an interesting word. What does it mean? So the other word is andragogy, or andragogy, and that's ANDRAGOGY, and that refers to also something that's related to teaching and learning, but for adults. It is about adult learning, and it's a relatively newer word. I think as you looked it up, it was a reference from the 1960s. What was that? 1968. Yeah.
1968.
Yeah. So that was, I thought, an interesting word. Now, granted, these are words you're probably not going to use a lot, so maybe we won't go into that. But I want, and I'll wrap it up really quickly with one more word, and that's predilections. That's P-R-E-D-E. I'm sorry, P-R-E-D-I. It's not E. P-R-E-D-I-L-E-C-T-I-O-N-S. Predilections refer to tendencies or preferences, things that you tend to do. Right? I have a predilection for certain types of food when I go out to eat. I tend to go for certain cuisines. Those are predilections. I may have a tendency for certain behaviors or certain practices. Anyway,
I think we both have a predilection for fun words.
Yeah.
Playing with words.
Fun, interesting words, exactly. Anyway, with that being said, I think we both have that predilection, so it's time for maybe references from you on certain things or word plays that you want to investigate or offer to others.
I was going to offer up a couple of idioms. To hit the nail on the head, which has come up a few times here.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier in our conversation.
Get something just exactly right. As if you've got a hammer and you've got a nail, and you get the hammer to land just exactly right on the nail, on the head of the nail, as opposed to on your thumb, which is bad.
That means you missed.
So to hit the nail on the head is to get it just exactly right. That sweet moment when you hit and the nail just goes dunk and everything feels good. And I wanted to contrast that with another similar idiom, or seemingly similar idiom, to hit the head, which is mainly a US idiom about going to the toilet. And it comes out of the US military, where the US military tend to, I think mainly the Navy, call the toilets the head. I think because they're up at the head of the ship or something like that.
That's right.
And so to hit the head is very different from hitting the nail on the head. Two very different idioms. Never mix them up.
Never. That's right. They're using the same word, but they're completely different meaning. And this is one of the things that I think is really fascinating about the English language, about how flexible words are, that in a different context, they can mean something else completely. So that's really interesting. But let's continue on and go on to our next more extended segment on discussing elements of the English language and our experience with it. One of the things I think is fascinating to us in teaching is the experiences we've had with students and learners on these online platforms. I know we've had a wide range of experiences. Some are very similar and some quite different. But if I ask you, let's talk about some of these experiences and questions and typical weird and maybe very common questions that you get on these platforms. What would you say they are that you tend to get?
The commonest ones. I'll save the weirdest one I've ever had for later.
Yeah, okay.
But the commonest one is, how can I improve my English? Now, I often am online in rooms, social audio rooms, where I say I'm going to give everyone, each person, 10, 15 minutes, and I'll help them with some aspect of their English. And sometimes I'll say, how can I help you with English today? In the next 10 minutes. And the answer is, very commonly, well, I would like to fix my grammar and my vocabulary and my pronunciation and my confidence, please. And I think, that's a big ask in 10 minutes. That's the commonest question, I think. How about you?
That is a tall order. And to say that, how can I improve all those things at once? Very similar to, I get that question a lot. And sometimes from people who haven't gotten the interaction with me to even know me much, but they'll come into the room, whether it's on Clubhouse or Chatter or Hi Local, and it'll be one of the first questions they ask. Yeah, and I don't want to make fun of them when I do my accents. By the way, I do my accents out of a certain degree of respect. But people will say simply, how can I improve my English? And then I say, well, you need to be a little bit more specific. I mean, yeah, are you talking about your vocabulary? Are you talking about your confidence? Are you talking about your pronunciation? Are we talking about your grammar? Are we talking about your understanding of culture and how idioms and phrases are used in the language because you want to watch TV? I mean, so I try to back people up a little bit and say, okay, no, let's just slow things down here. I want to know who you are. I want to know what your objectives and goals are. Are you a student? Are you working? Do you want to have a certain ability to converse with other people in your profession? Are you looking to pursue a certain career in academics? Whatever it is, I'd like to know that first before I start giving you the prescription, right? To say, this is what you need to do to fix this problem or this issue or to address this skill, lack of skill or the skill that you want to improve or to refine. It's very similar to my experience as a personal trainer or a fitness instructor. I'm not going to go to someone and say, do these exercises unless I know you can do them, unless I know what your goals and objectives are, unless I understand what your current state is. And that's what we really need to do as teachers, is to get a sense of a baseline before we start moving in the direction of, okay, let's move in this direction to quote unquote fix this. So I think that's one of the most common questions. Yeah. But there's all kinds, And
yeah. One of the other really common questions, which I was kind of surprised at, but really, like you and your personal trainer experience, really complemented well the fact that I had a sports coaching background and a management coaching background as a management consultant. Coming in, and they weren't really asking about anything to do with something technical, but they wanted to improve their confidence, or they come in, start to want to speak, either in the room or in other situations, and just when they're going to speak a sentence, they look for the words that they know, and all the words have gone. They've just flown away. And those are probably certainly the top 5 questions I get asked over and over again. How can I improve my confidence? How can I overcome the fact that the words all disappear just at the moment I want to use them?
Yeah.
And luckily I have answers.
We do have answers. And this is something that I think I've gotten better and better at answering, because, and I used to say this a lot, that if you want to be a good teacher, you have to be a good learner yourself. And we're always, as teachers, trying to refine our skills and abilities and learn from other teachers, to learn and understand what the challenges that students have. And as we do that, as we get more of these questions repeatedly, I tend to refine my answer and actually sometimes will research my own answers to say, is this right? So like people would ask, how do I remember words that I learned? Fortunately, we're not reinventing the wheel here. There are ways that people have studied and researched on how to remember things and what we can do to apply that in a classroom setting to help people remember. There are certain ways that the brain operates that we need to understand, and we don't have to get into the deep science of it, but we can apply some of the methods and techniques, exercises to help people achieve what they want. And I've learned about that, in terms of remembering things, how to remember, because I forget things all the time. And that's a normal thing, One thing I'll also say and I want to hear your perspective on it. I hear the word perfect a lot. I don't speak perfectly, or I don't have I don't have the perfect word. I'm sorry, my English is not perfect. And I
I
have to,
want le bon mot.
yeah, and I have to tell people, please stop referring to that word and using that word in this way, because it's an English word. Nothing wrong, evil about using it. But in terms of learning, once we set the target as perfection, we're already setting something that's unachievable. And we need to be incremental and moderate in our expectations, but continue to learn all the time. Don't expect perfection.
One of my favorite phrases.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is in the UK university system, if you either get ordinary degrees if you do a 3-year degree in Scotland, or you get honours degrees. And you can get third class honours, which is, you passed. And you can get second class honours. And they're so common they get split into 2-2 and 2-1. 2-1's very good. Kind of, you did great and also enjoyed your time at university. 2-2 is pretty good. And then you get first class honours, the top that you can get. And you have to get an average mark of 70% to get the top mark possible. And so I always say to myself and to other people, 70% is a first. You can't get better than getting 70% right. Just remember, you can get a third of it wrong, or practically a third of it wrong, and you're still going to get the absolute top marks. And just relax. You don't need perfection. You're not going to get perfection, probably. So aim for what's achievable.
And another aspect of this whole idea of perfection is that when you look at speakers, great authors in the English language, people who have made it their profession, journalists, writers, those people who write books, those who write news articles, and are what you would refer to as presenters. In the UK, we call them news announcers, but basically those people whose profession is to speak professionally and to engage in discussions with large audiences. I actually looked into this issue. The English language, depending on which dictionary you use, that's granted, that's true, but it ranges. The number of words in the English language is something in the range of several 100,000 to up to 1 million, depending on which words you use, which dictionaries.
Yeah.
And that includes things like grunts and technical terms and, things that are medical terms that nobody knows, but it includes everything, scientific terms for certain plants and species.
I am tempted at this exact moment. So I've got 6 dictionaries on my desk here.
Yeah.
Because English doesn't have an official Institute of English. It has multiple competing dictionaries. It's a kind of popularity contest.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a version of the complete Oxford Dictionary, which is the compact Oxford Dictionary. I'm going to risk getting a hernia, and I'm going to try and pull it out and display it.
All right, don't hurt yourself.
So this is the compact edition.
That's the compact. That's the abridged version.
This is the compact. It's not abridged.
Oh, it's not abridged.
It's just condensed.
Okay.
And it's condensed because there are 9 pages of dictionary on every page. And it's typed so small.
Wow.
This type is so tiny. You have to use this. You get the magnifying glass with the dictionary.
Wait a minute. You're telling me on each page is actually 9 pages.
Yes. I might as well show it, seeing as we're here. It also comes with a user guide.
Okay.
So
I got to see this. Oh, the dictionary comes with a user's manual.
Yeah. because so this is the
Oh my
dictionary,
God.
and
Oh,
it's 9 pages of the Oxford
9 pages on each page.
printed onto
Okay,
every
okay. I see
page,
what you mean. Oh my God. All right. So let me finish my
and
reference here.
there are over 1 million words
Yeah.
in this.
So look, when you got a diction, when you got in a language, when you have a language with upwards of several 100,000 to 1 million words, I want you to put this in perspective because those people who are considered extremely proficient in English, academics in their own field, people who have decades of research, who can give lectures to thousands, people who are journalists, writers who have written dozens of books, their vocabulary is generally considered extremely good, and their vocabulary, their active vocabulary, is in the range of 35 to 50,000 words. 35 to 50,000 words on average. Yes, you're going to have some people higher, some people lower. People who just memorize words because they have some ability to do that and they train themselves. But 30 to
You mean you
50,000.
didn't read dictionaries as a kid?
I did.
I just like a novel.
I admit to having a predilection. We used that word earlier.
I think you
had a
should.
predilection for just diving into words. And we would challenge, there was a friend of mine in fourth or fifth grade. We would challenge each other to find words that the other person didn't know. And we used to have words when we were growing up, Scrabble, right? Where you'd come up with words and say, oh, that's not a word. You can't use that word in the game. I said, that's a word. I assure you, that's a word, right? So like we would
I
play.
have. I have a few times when people say, what about this word? And I have confidently said to them, no, that's not a word.
Yeah.
There's one vortical, which I was convinced was a misspelling of vertical. And it means to move like a vortex.
Yeah.
And I've worked in mechanical engineering where we were doing vortices.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never used that word, never heard that word. So even though it turns out I had worked in that specialist field, I'd never heard that word ever.
Yeah.
And it happens to us all.
So you have these hundreds of thousands of words, and the people who are at the pinnacle of their careers, of their professions in speech, in writing, in using the language, and they are considered at the top of their fields, they have maybe a vocabulary of 35, 40,000 words out of the million, out of a million. So why should, and I'm going to conclude with this. Well, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'll just say, why should a learner set their goal of being perfect? You cannot be perfect. You cannot know everything. You cannot know all the nuances of grammar. You cannot know all the nuances, all the vocabulary that exists, all the terms, all the idioms, all the phrases. What you can do is learn to get better and better and better and expose yourself to more. That's all I wanted to say about that. Yeah, so perfect
Learn
is
how
it.
to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, there are stats for learners of English as a foreign language. How many words do they know? Now, native speakers, the top native speakers are 35,000 plus. But, there are average native speakers and there are some native speakers who aren't even average. And it comes down to 10, 15, 20,000 words of vocabulary. And the average learner of English has about 4,500 words. The average learner of English who is in a foreign country, i.e. they've moved a country to another country, has 10,000 words. And they don't need to move to an English language country to get that bump, apparently. Just if you live in a country other than your own, your English tends to get a bigger vocabulary. And you only need 3,500 to be at advanced English. C1 English is only 3,000 700 words.
Yeah.
So people only need 900 words to move to A2, another 800 to move to B1, another 700 to move to to B1, and another 1,300 to move from B2 up to C1. So we don't need an enormous vocabulary. We can get by with quite a small one. So
Yeah, no, this is great, and I think we'll be coming back to this subject many times in the future and talking about different levels and what people need to do to go from one level to the next. But yeah, I think this is really a fascinating segment that we just had. Let's go to our final segment. And before we get to our final segment, I want to have a little bit of a break and have a very short segment on some recommendations of things that we think you guys should check out, things that we come across. They could be in the form of books, movies, podcasts, videos, whatever, articles that we read. But I want to start off with you. I'll come back to mine in a bit, but I want to hear about any recommendations you have, any suggestions for people who might want to look to something to continue to advance their English.
So, one of the things we want people to try and engage with is something that's fun, because if it's fun, you'll do more of it. And one of the most fun animations in the English language is free on YouTube. It was created by the people who went on to make Peppa Pig, who became a worldwide phenomenon. But their very first animation was called The Big Nights. It's free on YouTube at the moment. And we can put the link into the description for the video, I'm sure. And it's the adventures of two hapless, idiotic, brawny, muscly, stupid, rich people with swords. And they're voiced by Shakespearean actors. And there are lots of very pucka voices around them, doing the king and the princesses and other people. There's even someone with a comedy upper crust London accent of the 1950s. And he actually genuinely has that voice, because I heard him when he was just being interviewed. And then there are lots of comic actors doing fake Eastern European accents because it's set in some sort of Ruritanian country. There are 13 episodes. They're 10 minutes long. There's not a huge use of language in them, but it's still clever and funny to appeal to adults and to younger children, and middle-aged children as well.
No.
It's great. The Big Nights. I thoroughly recommend
That's
them.
great. And we'll have the link for that in our episode notes here. And that's Nights with a K if you want to look it up, right? Knights. But we'll make sure we have the link for it. Yeah, I've got a couple of quick recommendations as well. One of my favorite things to do is listen to podcasts and listen to particularly a network here in the United States called NPR, National Public Radio. And they've got a number of great ones, but I want to give you a couple right now. And one of them is kind of both an entertaining as well as current events kind of show. It has a weekly episode and they've been going on for many years. It's called Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. That's the name of the show. It's actually a kind of a game show, meaning it's a tongue-in-cheek game show. It's not really very serious, like you're winning a lot of prizes and awards, but they have celebrities. They'll sometimes have people who are famous, singers and actors, and people who have done amazing things, athletes, and they talk to them, and they actually have them participate, but they cover the events news. And you also have comedians who are also talking and conversing. It's a great way to expose yourself to everyday colloquial English, how people talk and interact and engage with each other in a humorous way. There's another show that I'll recommend, which is called Fresh Air. And that is also an NPR with a world-renowned, excellent interviewer, Terry Gross. And the interviews that she has are with politicians, with journalists, with authors, with scientists, with people who are noteworthy comedians and humorists as well. And it's a great interactive and well-produced program where you hear a really interesting conversation on a subject that you might learn a lot from. So I would recommend both of those. All right. With that segment out, and again, maybe in the future episodes, we'll have kind of a little jingle to get us in and out of each of these segments. But let's go to our final segment. And this is the one that what do you want to say about it?
A fast one.
And we're going to try to do this quickly as well. But there was a news story I came across earlier today, and that was about this explosive controversy that's emerging here in North America, and particularly in Canada. And it is these English linguists and language experts in England who study the language. They're saying there's something bad going on here. And what they found out is that their annual budget that Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, was in charge of putting out, that it had incorporated a lot of the British spellings of certain words, as opposed to what was practiced for decades using the North American, or often some referred to as American spellings. And they're saying, no, this is not right. We want to go back to our Canadian and American ways of spelling instead of the British ways. What do you think about this?
Well, I mean, the key point to remember is what we had was British spellings preserved in Canada as a bastion of Canadian identity, as opposed to being absorbed into a North American identity. A lot of Canadian identity politics is about how we're not USAians.
USAians?
So,
Americans, yeah.
USAians.
Oh.
Well, there was a big controversy at the time of the Declaration of Independence about what the country should be called. And there was the Founding Fathers had a genuine, serious conversation about whether they should legitimately call themselves the United States of America, lending itself to being called Americans, and thus kind of laying claim to ownership of the entire continent. And you will find lots of people from South America who say, it's terrible that Americans call themselves Americans. What are we then? Chopped liver?
All right, but that's a side issue.
So
What about the spellings here?
They were genuinely going to call themselves the United States of Colombia, potentially, so that they would be Colombians.
Okay, I think you and I, at some point in the future, we're going to have to talk about the world-renowned documentary that came out by one of the world's greatest, but one of the best documentarians in American history, and that's and he also produced the Civil War. Now I can't think of his name. Anyway, there was one on the Revolutionary Wars, really deep in understanding. Well, I want to get back to this issue of the spellings. Get to this point.
Canada spellings, they preserved a lot of British spellings. They didn't adopt US spellings. In the same way, Noah Webster deliberately decided to have new spellings for a new country in the New World.
What does that have to do with
Canadians,
today?
Well, that's why there are US spellings.
Yeah, but that change occurred, and let's.
It didn't occur in Canada then, and Canada basically has a combination of some of the American spelling usages and some of the British spelling usages. That's what they have. They have a combination and a mixture.
One thing we do know.
5 academics have written a letter saying it's terrible that Mark Carney has spent all these years in Britain and is spelling some words the British way. But also, they're saying that we ought to be using Canadian spellings to assert our independence and separateness from America. And what I find ironic
and from Britain
in all of this,
and from Britain,
no, specifically from America because of Trumpian stuff at the moment. Let's not go there.
Okay, well,
the key thing is the spellings that they're complaining about. What they want to do is make them US spellings. Make sure that they're US spellings. They're okay with the ones that habitually remain British. But there are some spellings that have tended to move in the American direction over the last 30 years, something like that.
Okay,
they're up in arms about that. they want to make sure that they use the US spellings, which in some cases are used in Canada more in recent decades,
I tend to have a
to
very
make sure they assert their Canadian identity. And I find that kind of fascinatingly contradictory.
okay. Well,
I mean, I understand it,
I have a very
but
different take on this whole thing, and
but we've read different articles
and
by different
but
journals
I don't think it's
about it.
about specifically even the articles. It's really about an understanding of what the Canadian mentality is, and I, being married to a Canadian and having visited Canada many times, it's my second home basically. I have gone there and talked to hundreds of people and have many relatives there. There's a very strong and distinct identity as Canadians that people have about being who they are. And the one thing we also have to acknowledge linguistically, spellings have changed throughout the history of English, throughout its history. And that has not been just,
Up
you
to a
know,
point, Lord Copper.
and that has not been exclusively outside of England. Those spellings did change significantly for over periods of hundreds of years. Now, what the point is about these developments here in this
For
news,
instance, we used to have the big knechts
what I'm saying about
in
what's
the big
happening,
knights.
what I'm saying about what's happening here in the reference to Canada is that there were certain spellings as they were practiced in Canada for decades that has changed now because of, they say, the influence that the current prime minister has had from his British connection and also being a British citizen and
But
being married to a British
but
and being
equally,
educated in Britain. Yeah.
but equally, what we've been discussing earlier is how English is a descriptivist language. Dictionaries reflect usage. They don't determine usage. In some countries, the dictionaries are produced by an official government department that tells you this is the way it must be spelt. L'Institut Français, for example. English doesn't have that. What we have are multiple competing dictionaries that attempt to best reflect what's going on. And there used to be a strong tendency in those authorities to be prescriptivist, to tell you what you should do. And what I also find interesting in this controversy is one of the 5 people who are causing the controversy is the guy who's in charge of the Canadian dictionary. And to an extent, I feel there's a degree of, wait a minute, no, I'm telling you it should be different. Buy my dictionary, do what I say, as opposed to forcing me to describe what people are doing. But I think we should come back and discuss more about this sort of issue of mutation and evolution and the way that language kind of changes fashionably, and then the fashions ripple out from some cultural center.
I think one
Like
of the points that I
ripples in
100%
water.
one of the points I 100% agree with you about is that language morphs and changes and evolves. It is a living thing, and it does not respect boundaries, political or otherwise. It sometimes incorporates the influences of other cultures as well as other languages in how we use
Especially
language.
English.
Especially English, and this is why we're doing a program and show about this, is because it is global. The vast majority of practitioners and users of the language are non-native. The vast majority of the people who use English are not native speaking. That is something that I learned fairly recently. There are hundreds of millions of native speaking populations, but there's far more who use the language, who engage in it professionally, who will use it for academics, who will use it for their research, who will use it for their job, their profession. And those are, and when you think about just India, for example, there's hundreds of millions of English speakers there. They might not speak in the same accent or the same, have the same pronunciation of certain words, but they use the language.
But few of them are users of English as a first language.
That's true. That's true. But when you include those that are, and there are some very well accomplished, highly accomplished writers who are from India, who are from Africa.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely. So anyway, definitely we have a lot of fodder.
Lots of discussion to
Lots
come.
of fodder for future reference. As we wrap this thing up.
Shall we finish off with a quote?
You know what? I'd love to do that. Let's finish off. What quote do you have to finish off for today?
So, speaking of Indian speakers of English, a lot of the people that we tend to consider as British were actually Anglo-Indian, born in India.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, George Orwell, who wrote 1984, who wrote Animal Farm, he was born in India. And another person who spent a lot of his professional career in India, about 120 years ago, I think, was Rudyard Kipling, who wrote The Jungle Book and Kim. But he also wrote as a journalist. He was there as a journalist principally, and he wrote a little mnemonic to remind people how to ask questions, how to get yourself better informed about the world. Seeing as we've just finished on a news article, I thought this would be good. It's called His 6 Honest Serving Men. The first verse is, because it does go on for several verses, I didn't realize, but it does. I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. Their names are what and why and when and how and where and who. And I learnt that as something like an 8-year-old, and it's always kind of lived with me ever since.
That is great. I like that a lot. And when you're talking about a short parable, a short little story that has a moral to it, that has a lesson, a life lesson to say, it's all about the questions. The who, what, where, why. That's how we learn. Those are the ones that greatest influence us. Those men that he's referring to. Of course, this was a time when it was all about men. They weren't going to say people or men, generally. It was men. But that's part of the time. But anyway, yes. Who, what, where, when,
I think it was Churchill who said, when I say men, I am, of course, thinking of women.
Which means something else. But anyway, this has been really good. I'm glad we're able to do this. And we'll try to do this periodically. And you can look for more episodes here. But I also want us to, remember that there's many other places that we can be found. I want to mention that, Gordon, where else are you active before we sign off here?
So I am active on Tandem. I have 4 regular featured parties a week there. Currently, I have a couple of regular parties a week on High Local, a fun reading room where we read free novels on a Sunday, and Mondays I do quick readings on wisdom and the like. Where else can I be found? Oh, YouTube. I'm trying desperately to build up my YouTube following for my little videos on idioms and vocabulary.
And we'll have Gordon's. We'll have your link to your YouTube channel here as well.
Indeed. And the final place is Telegram, where I have a community of a few hundred people, where I post reading texts, written phonetic guidance. I leave audio recordings of me reading the reading text, so you can read along, see the written phonetic guidance, so as you can see how to pronounce. You can listen to me, so you can see how the pronunciation guidance works. You can press pause, and then you can practice and shadow and imitate, and then press play again, listen to the text. So that's certainly something that I give away for free that I'm really proud of.
All right. Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. And likewise, you can find me on Clubhouse and Chatter. I've been doing a lot more in Chatter recently. I do simulcast rooms usually a few times a week where I have lessons on vocabulary, lessons on improving grammar, as well as pronunciation and confidence. There's a number of other things I touch on. But yeah, I'd love to, have you join me in those rooms as well. Thanks again, Gordon. Really appreciate this. This has been really good. We'll do this again soon. I just want to say thanks to all of you for joining us on this day here on English Musings. We hope this conversation has been give you something to think about, right? Something to ponder as we continue on our English learning journey.
Something to muse upon.
Indeed. Absolutely. Something to muse upon, and share this stuff with your friends and family, anybody who wants to, maybe who identifies as either a lover or a learner of English, either one of those categories. We'd love to have you. All right. Any last point before you want to say bye?
I hope everyone has a lovely holiday season, and I hope to see you all in the new year, if not before.
Likewise. All right, we'll see you. And don't forget to like and subscribe. I forgot to say that. We should have said that from the beginning.
And hit the bell notification icon.
Yes.
I only discovered from my son about a month ago that that's a separate thing. We need you to hit the bell notification icon as well.
Like and subscribe and hit the bell notification. All right, we'll see you all soon, and bye for now. And this is going to be a rather abrupt finish, but we'll have a little bit better production quality next time. See you soon. Bye for now.